Hello everyone, this video is going to be the first in a series where I go over things that I've thrifted. Now I just picked up these speakers at my local thrift store for $13. They are Cerwin-Vega L7s. Now Cerwin-Vega was founded in 1954 by Gene Cerwinski. They're currently owned by Gibson. They were bought in 2011. They're handled by the division of Gibson that owns KRK and Stanton. They originally worked on prototyping advanced drivers that could produce ridiculous low end for the time frequencies that most people weren't able to hit. Their speakers can be found in Fender amps. A lot of like twin reverbs and things like that would come loaded with Cerwin-Vega 12 inches. They're easy to spot. They have bright orange backs on them. And Cerwin-Vega actually was one of the first companies to invent like an early 5.1 surround system. They called it Sensurround, and it used folded horn subwoofers and an optical audio track off of film to produce what we essentially would call low frequency effects now, which is the 0.1 in the 5.1 standard. Now, Cerwin-Vega's slogan used to be, "Loud is beautiful if it's clean." Now, these things get very loud, and they do not distort. That's kind of the best thing about them, and which is why I'm going to keep them and get rid of some of the smaller bookshelf speakers I have, because they you just push them and they don't clip, and it's great. I am so used to little 6-inch drivers that just distort if you throw any low end at them. So I'm going to pair these up with a good subwoofer and run them in my tool room. They're 75 watts, 8 ohms, and they have a sensitivity of 92 decibels, a range of 40 hertz to 20 kilohertz, which is pretty impressive for a cabinet like this. I wouldn't expect to get house shaking low end and shaky sub bass and really thuddy kicks out of it, but that's kind of what a subwoofer is for. So these get the rest of the job done, in my opinion. Now, I'm going to play a little bit of a demo here, just off of something I cooked up so that YouTube doesn't, decide my video can't be seen by anyone. Now, as you could hear, well, I'm not sure how well my phone microphone's going to be able to pick this up, but there are plenty of demos of this online if you're interested to hear what they sound like. Now, I'm going to go over a couple of things that you should look out for when purchasing used speakers. I've learned all of this stuff over the years, just thrifting and, seeing a lot of very broken items, having to fix broken things. There's a couple key things you want to look out for, and a couple things you can use to determine whether or not the speaker is going to be worth getting. One of the best ways I determine quickly if something's even worth looking at is the weight. These things are heavy. Now, sometimes they'll try to trick you. I've gotten speakers that had literal bricks in them, like Loctited to the plastic. Sometimes you're just gonna get played like that, but that generally only happens with the cheaper brands. But weight is a good indicator that there are quality magnets in the driver, there are quality components in the crossover, You have good thick pieces of plywood, insulation inside. That all adds to the weight, and that's going to add to the quality of the cabinet that you're looking at. The other thing to look at is your drivers here. They have a couple components. You have your surround, you have your cone, and you have your dust cap. Now, the surround on old speakers tends to get very dry, and they're never really stored in an environment that's humidified correctly, and they will dry rot away completely. Sometimes you'll see they'll be intact, but you can like essentially push pieces out of it. Other times you'll find them like gone, completely gone, and those speakers are ruined. The only way to fix them is to replace the drivers, and at that point they're essentially totaled unless they're extremely nice cabinets. The other thing you want to look for is holes in the cone. Sometimes little holes can get punched in. That's fixable. You can essentially just patch it up and glue something on. Or if it's a tiny nick, you can just put a little bit of glue and that will seal it up. You kind of just want to seal it because that pressure helps the speaker itself move. With dust caps, this is kind of the least of your worries. It doesn't really do anything but keep dust off of it, like the name says. If they're dented in, you can pop them back out. It's okay to push slight pinholes in it and pop them out, but you want to leave as little of a hole as possible. The other thing is these tweeters. Sometimes they're like a little dust cap shaped dome. They can be deflated, they'll have holes punched in them, and if that happens, they're trashed. And they make very, very horrible, distorted, high-frequency sounds. The other thing you want to take a look at is the efficiency and the power rating of your amp. Now, a lot of the times it will tell you, at the very least, the wattage and the impedance in ohms on the back. This can help determine whether or not it's going to be compatible with the amplification system you have or you're looking to get. 75 watts is pretty big for a bookshelf speaker. Not the highest, but a pretty decent range on that. And then 8 ohms is pretty common for bookshelf speakers like this. Sometimes better ones will be 16 ohms. Real cheap ones can be 4 ohms. But essentially, you just need to make sure that this is going to work with whatever system you need to amplify. There's also a difference between peak and RMS wattage. It's hard to find any specifications on these particular cabinets, but I'm assuming that's 75 watts peak power handling, which really means these things probably handle around 50 watts RMS, which is root mean square, or it's another word for average power over time. So this can handle 75 watt peaks, say when there's a large rush in the mix from a kick drum or a crash of a cymbal, something that is would normally be ducked out by a compressor. Those peaks can be handled up to 75 watts, but normally under average operation, these will consume about 50 watts. So you want to get within spec. You don't necessarily need to meet the requirements of the speakers in order to drive them from an amp, but it's always good to get as close as possible. I have this hooked up to a little Kenwood receiver. This thing has been great and reliable and surprisingly powerful for how tiny it is. Quite happy with this pickup. I think for $13, you can't really go wrong. Especially for the cabinet and the drivers alone, I think that's worth it. A couple bonus items from when I picked these up. Random VHS tapes. I like to buy strange things like these that might not actually exist online in any format, because I have now the means to digitize VHS tapes. This is a really badass RCA tape VCR player that has time-based correction, which will essentially allow a VHS signal to be digitized. That's a big problem you have to solve. It's just an issue with converting analog to digital signals, especially for video. We've got Young Frankenstein, Mel Brooks, classic, and I don't know. When tapes are $2, sometimes you gotta take a risk. And the last one, cables. You can never have enough cables. Always check your thrift store for cables. It's the best way to pick up cheap, decent audio cables. If you know how to fix them yourself, that's even better. All right, well, that's all I have to say about these Cerwin-Vega speakers. Thank you for watching my video. If you have any questions, if you have anything you'd like to see, just from this video, there's a couple things laying around. I'm going to be uploading probably every day if I can manage it. You know, just showcasing things that I've thrifted, because I've spent too much money over several years on a ton of really cool stuff. Music, tech, vintage to new school, whatever. And I'm going to try and show all of it off.